But after the accident in turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, we've lost Dale Earnhardt.
On February 18, 2001, the NASCAR world was shaken to its very core. The man who defined the sport for decades, Dale Earnhardt Sr., the Intimidator, the driver who seemed invincible behind the wheel of his iconic black number 3 Chevrolet, met his end in a way no one could have predicted. Millions of fans around the globe were glued to their television screens watching the Daytona 500, a race that was supposed to celebrate the beginning of another thrilling season. Instead, it became the darkest day in racing history. As the cars thundered around the final lap, Earnhardt fought for position, defending his teammates Michael Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt Jr. when tragedy struck. His car made contact, slid up the track, and slammed head-on into the wall at nearly 160 miles per hour. At first, it didn't look like a devastating crash. Fans had seen much worse wrecks in NASCAR's violent history. Many expected Earnhardt to climb out of the car, dust himself off, and wave to the crowd. But this time, that moment never came. When fellow driver Ken Schrader rushed to check on him, the expression on his face told the world that something was terribly wrong. Behind the scenes, doctors and safety crews fought desperately, but the grim reality was already sealed. Dale Earnhardt Sr. was gone. The shocking details that later surfaced in his autopsy report revealed just how catastrophic his injuries were and why survival had been impossible from the moment of impact. These disturbing findings would ignite controversy, change laws, and ultimately revolutionize NASCAR safety forever. The 2001 Daytona 500 was supposed to be a celebration, the kind of spectacle that NASCAR fans look forward to all year long. The race marked the start of a new season, the return of legends, and the rise of new stars. For Dale Earnhardt Sr., it was yet another chance to showcase the grit and determination that had made him one of the most iconic figures in motorsports. He had already captured 7 Winston Cup championships and 76 career victories. By 2001, he wasn't just a racer, he was a symbol of toughness, a man who embodied the very spirit of NASCAR. Fans called him the Intimidator because of his ruthless driving style and the black Chevrolet that struck fear into competitors. Heading into the final laps, Earnhardt wasn't racing for himself. Instead, he was blocking and defending to ensure that his son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and his driver, Michael Waltrip, could finish at the front. Waltrip was chasing his first-ever Daytona 500 win, and Earnhardt Sr. wanted to secure it for him. This was Dale at his best, a leader protecting his team. On that last lap, with cars tightly packed together and speeds nearing 190 miles per hour, danger was everywhere. Just seconds from the checkered flag, it all unraveled. As the pack roared through turn 4, Sterling Marlin's car nudged the back of Earnhardt's Chevrolet. The slight contact sent Earnhardt veering up the track. His car clipped Ken Schrader's vehicle, then slammed headfirst into the concrete retaining wall at nearly 160 miles per hour. The impact was brutal and instantaneous. To the millions watching live, the wreck didn't look catastrophic compared to some of NASCAR's more violent rollovers or fiery crashes. Many assumed the Intimidator would emerge shaken but alive. But what followed revealed the chilling truth. Ken Schrader, caught up in the wreck, immediately pulled his car to a stop and rushed toward Earnhardt's number 3. Schrader was one of Dale's closest friends, and what he saw inside the wrecked Chevrolet was so shocking that he later avoided describing it in detail. His face, pale and grim as he spoke to reporters afterward, said more than words ever could. "I knew it was bad, real bad," Schrader admitted. That was the first public sign that something tragic had occurred. Rescue crews swarmed the scene, working frantically to extract Earnhardt from the car. The crowd at Daytona International Speedway grew restless, waiting for the sight of their hero waving to reassure them. But the minutes dragged on. Emergency personnel performed CPR as they rushed him to Halifax Medical Center in Daytona Beach. Fans clung to hope, but the truth was already clear to those closest to the crash. Dale Earnhardt Sr. had suffered injuries no one could walk away from. At 5:16 p.m., NASCAR officials confirmed the unthinkable. Dale Earnhardt Sr., the greatest driver of his era, had been pronounced dead. The announcement stunned not just the motorsports community, but the entire nation. This wasn't just a driver's death. It was the loss of a cultural icon. In the hours and days that followed, speculation ran rampant. How could a crash that seemed survivable at first glance have taken the life of a man so tough, so seemingly unbreakable? Fans and experts alike demanded answers. NASCAR initially kept details quiet out of respect for the Earnhardt family. But whispers began to circulate about the seatbelt, about his position in the car, and about the severity of his head injury. The truth revealed later in the autopsy was far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The crash may not have looked catastrophic, but inside that cockpit, the physics were merciless. The sudden stop had forced Earnhardt's head forward with devastating force. His neck and skull absorbed the brunt of the impact. When the autopsy report was later examined, it showed that Earnhardt had suffered one of the deadliest injuries in motorsports, a basilar skull fracture. This single detail explained why the wreck had been instantly fatal, and why even the fastest medical response couldn't have saved him. The Daytona 500 of 2001 will forever be remembered as the race that claimed the Intimidator. It was a tragedy that unfolded not in a fiery spectacle, but in a deceptively ordinary-looking wreck. And yet, within those seemingly minor details lay a chain of events that exposed vulnerabilities in NASCAR's safety standards, flaws that had been ignored for far too long. When the dust settled after the tragic Daytona 500 crash, the world demanded answers. Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s death didn't make sense to fans, reporters, or even fellow drivers. How could a seemingly routine crash claim the life of one of the toughest men in racing? The truth was hidden within the grim findings of the autopsy report, details so disturbing that they shook NASCAR, his family, and the entire fan base to the core. The autopsy, conducted at Halifax Medical Center, revealed that Dale Earnhardt Sr. had suffered a basilar skull fracture, one of the most catastrophic injuries a human being can endure. This fracture occurs at the base of the skull, near the brainstem, an area that controls vital functions like breathing and heartbeat. The force of Earnhardt's impact with the wall had whipped his head forward so violently that the skull cracked at its foundation. The injury was not only devastating, it was instantly fatal. Doctors explained that no matter how fast the medical response, there was nothing anyone could have done. Death was immediate. The report also noted blunt force trauma to the chest and other parts of his body, but it was the head injury that sealed his fate. What disturbed many was that the crash did not appear violent to the naked eye. Compared to fiery accidents where drivers had survived, Earnhardt's wreck looked minor. That contrast made the autopsy findings even harder to process. The human body, no matter how strong, simply could not withstand the forces at play inside that car. Another disturbing detail that emerged was the condition of Earnhardt's seatbelt. Early reports suggested that his left lap belt had torn during the crash, possibly worsening the injuries by allowing his upper body to jolt forward with even greater force. This detail fueled a storm of controversy. Was the fatal injury caused solely by the crash, or had equipment failure played a role? NASCAR officials and safety experts clashed over the answer, with some pointing to the belt as a contributing factor, while others insisted that the skull fracture alone would have been fatal regardless. The public was desperate for information, and the media pressed hard. However, the release of autopsy details quickly spiraled into a battle over privacy and respect for the family. Florida's laws at the time made autopsy photos and reports accessible to the public, meaning gruesome images of Earnhardt could be published. Teresa Earnhardt, Dale's widow, fought fiercely to keep those records sealed, insisting that no family should endure the horror of seeing their loved one's body turned into tabloid material. The fight led to the passage of the Earnhardt Family Protection Act, a law that shielded autopsy photos from public release in Florida. It was a landmark legal shift sparked by the disturbing realities of Earnhardt's death. Still, portions of the report became public knowledge. It painted a chilling picture. Dale Earnhardt Sr. had been alive and alert seconds before impact, but the collision robbed him of life instantly. The basilar skull fracture was a death sentence. Experts later explained that the violent deceleration had essentially caused the base of his skull to snap forward against his spine. To fans who revered him as indestructible, this was almost impossible to comprehend. The grim details sparked widespread fear across the racing community. If Dale Earnhardt Sr., the toughest, most experienced driver of them all, could be killed in what looked like a survivable wreck, then no one was safe. Drivers began openly questioning whether NASCAR was doing enough to protect them. For years, many had resisted additional safety equipment, particularly the Hans device, which restricted head movement during crashes. But now, with Earnhardt's autopsy confirming that head and neck trauma had killed him, the resistance began to crumble. Perhaps the most disturbing element of all was the realization that Earnhardt's death was preventable. Safety experts had long warned about basilar skull fractures, citing previous driver fatalities. NASCAR had known the risk was real, but stronger safety measures were delayed, resisted, or dismissed. It took the loss of its biggest star and the horrifying details of his autopsy to finally force the sport to change. In the end, the autopsy was more than a medical report. It was a mirror held up to NASCAR, reflecting the deadly consequences of complacency. It confirmed the exact nature of Earnhardt's fatal injuries, but it also revealed the hidden dangers lurking in every race. These revelations would ignite fierce debates, legal battles, and ultimately transform the very foundations of motorsport safety. The disturbing details of Dale Earnhardt's autopsy weren't just about how he died. They were a wake-up call that would echo across every racetrack in America. In the aftermath of Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s shocking death, the autopsy report became the center of a storm unlike anything NASCAR had ever seen. While fans mourned and fellow drivers reflected on their own vulnerability, the disturbing details of Earnhardt's injuries created a clash between public curiosity, media rights, and the Earnhardt family's desperate plea for privacy. What began as a medical examination quickly escalated into a national debate, exposing uncomfortable truths about celebrity, tragedy, and the law. Almost immediately after the accident, news outlets began demanding access to the autopsy records. Florida law at the time allowed for such files, including photographs, to be made public. For the media, this was about transparency and reporting the facts. But for Teresa Earnhardt and her children, the very thought of graphic images of Dale's body being splashed across newspapers or websites was horrifying. They insisted that releasing such materials would not only be disrespectful to Dale's memory, but would inflict unbearable pain on his family. Teresa Earnhardt moved swiftly to block the release. What followed was a heated legal battle that drew national attention. Media companies argued that they had a right to the information, framing it as an issue of public record. The family countered that there had to be limits, that dignity in death mattered more than curiosity. This emotional tug-of-war reached the Florida state legislature, and soon the case of Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s autopsy became a matter of state law. The result was the Earnhardt Family Protection Act, a landmark bill passed in 2001. It prohibited the release of autopsy photos in Florida without the consent of next of kin. For the Earnhardts, it was a victory in their fight to protect Dale's dignity. But for the media, it was a precedent-setting defeat that raised questions about how far privacy could extend in matters of public interest. The controversy underscored just how deeply Earnhardt's death had affected not only racing, but American society at large. Yet even without photographs, the partial details that did emerge from the autopsy were disturbing enough. The confirmation of a basilar skull fracture and blunt force trauma became the central narrative. Fans who had watched the crash live could not reconcile how a wreck that seemed survivable had instead been instantly fatal. That disconnect fueled conspiracy theories. Some insisted the seatbelt failure was the real culprit, suggesting that NASCAR and equipment manufacturers were covering up negligence. Others whispered about medical negligence or hidden injuries. The secrecy surrounding the full autopsy only fueled those suspicions, making the controversy even more intense. Adding to the tension was the fact that Dale Earnhardt Sr. himself had resisted certain safety measures in the months leading up to his death. He had been critical of the Hans device, a head and neck support system designed to prevent exactly the kind of injury he suffered. "I can't drive with that thing on," he had reportedly said. To many, this was a tragic irony that the Intimidator, a man who prided himself on toughness and control, had refused the very technology that might have saved his life. Critics argued that NASCAR should have enforced stricter safety requirements long before 2001, regardless of driver resistance. The secrecy also carried emotional consequences for the Earnhardt family. Fans continued to demand answers, and conspiracy theories swirled for years. Teresa Earnhardt and her children, already shattered by loss, faced ongoing scrutiny. Every whisper of hidden truths or suppressed evidence reopened wounds. In interviews, they emphasized that Dale's death was not about controversy, but about the need for reform. Still, the more they tried to shield the details, the more the public speculated. Ultimately, the legal and public battles surrounding Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s autopsy revealed more than just the cause of his death. They exposed the fragile balance between public curiosity and private grief. They showed how tragedy can turn even the most personal matters, like a family's right to mourn, into national debates. And they highlighted NASCAR's struggle to confront its own shortcomings, while protecting the image of its biggest star. The disturbing details of Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s autopsy may never be fully revealed to the public, and perhaps that is for the best. But the controversy surrounding it proved that his death was bigger than racing. It was a cultural moment that forced people to question not only safety in sports, but also how we, as a society, handle tragedy when it happens in the public eye.